Mr. Lampy is joined at 5:07. I'm not sure who's speaking to the appeal process.
I can.
Sure.
So under the special event process, there comes a point where the clerk or any number of departments can deny or request a modification of the application. If that occurs, then under ordinance 428-7K, the applicant has a right to appeal that denial or modification request. The applicant appeals it directly to the licensing committee. The licensing committee can then review the application and makes a determination as to whether the denial or modification is appropriate, or if it's going to be revoked and they're going to approve that process. If the licensing committee does decide to deny or request a modification or change the modification requested, and the applicant's still not satisfied with that change, they also have an automatic right to appeal to the circuit court in either Dodge or Jefferson County.
So, Mr. Cheesebro, the staff is the one approving permit applications.
The ordinance requires that the staff approve the applications for special events unless a number of certain factors are qualified, and we'll get to those in a little bit. But the direction from the ordinances are that the staff will approve special events unless those factors take it into account.
Okay.
If the staff denies them for one of those specified reasons, it goes to licensing committee. Licensing committee again is supposed to approve it, except for under those limited circumstances. If it goes to circuit court, the circuit court's going to look at those specific circumstances, but then also apply case law and other factors to determine if the denial or approval or modification is reasonable.
I have another question.
Yes.
How many special event applications have been denied in the last few years?
Going back from 21 to present, I'm not aware of any applications that have been denied. In 2020, there were a number of applications that were denied due to COVID at that time, prohibiting certain events from taking place. Prior to 2020, I'm not aware of any applications that were denied.
Okay.
As part of the ordinance, there is a charge discounting that takes place in the first 5 years. Each year, there is an additional 20% assumption. So all of the city services that are assigned or come in from the different departments are totaled together by the finance department. And if an event happens to be in the first through 5th year, there is a discount rate assigned before that invoice is sent out.
Mr. Stevens, what happens when an event skips a year?
It's the number of times that an
It
event is held.
doesn't have to be contiguous or consistent.
No.
Okay.
Ms. Davis.
Looking at this handout with the charges invoice information for the 2023 special events, and there's a category that says city-sponsored event, no charges, fees, or insurance needed. And then over to the side then, for each of these events, it lists what year it is. So my question is, effectively, isn't the city a co-sponsor of every special event in the city of Watertown until we get to the 6th year of the event and succeeding years, effectively?
No, it's covering some of the potential costs for the events. It's reducing the cost and charges that they provide for the additional public services that they're providing for those events. But I don't think it would be fair to call us a sponsor of the event. We don't take control over the message of the events, the speech of the event. We don't take control over what the event is. We simply make sure that they comply with the ordinances and rules of the city. And as long as they're in compliance with the laws and rules of the city, we don't have any control or notification or affiliation with the event beyond that point.
Possibly a silent partner, financial partner?
I don't think you're going to get Stephen or I to say yes to that. I mean, in my mind, I go to insurance. we pointedly require these events to have insurance because they aren't on our insurance. And if they were a co-sponsor, I think a good example may be some that we do carve out for in our ordinances, like the parades or federally recognized holidays. I think it may have a specific carve out as well. And those, they aren't required to take their own insurance to ensure the safety of patrons. So for me, it's a no. But I acknowledge, Ms. Davis, we could all have a different opinion on that. Mr. Blanky?
So what would stop an event from saying, say I want to have Brad's Burger Bash this year, next year, and the year after? Well, then we're starting to get a little more expensive on city expenses. So then after that, we change it to Emily's Hamburger Bash. Do that for 2 years. Then we change it to Fred's Sandwich Station for 2 years. What's to stop an organization from doing something along those lines?
That is a good question. The argument that the city would come back with is that the event is the same event, and even though you change the title of the event, that doesn't change the spirit of the event, and therefore the event has been going on for this number of years. It's the same event. We're going to categorize it as the same event and add the charges of the city. If somebody contested that, we would likely end up coming back here and modifying this ordinance such that it was no longer provided this way. But I think the city's done this to try and be a good partner for organizations and for individuals to be able to start up types of events, because there are a lot of initial costs that some special events can't carry on their own for starting out.
So even if they were to change the individual applying for the license and say change it by a weekend or two, we would recognize that and apply this to it?
Yes, we would make that argument.
Thank you.
Ms. Davis?
I understand that this is a fairly new addition to the ordinance. Is it 3-4 years old, somewhere in that range? Somewhere in that range.
I think we did adjust the step. I think the steps existed before, but I think we adjusted them.
So I'm curious, have you found, or are you aware of any other city in Wisconsin that has a tiered approach to special event expenses and having that shared cost?
I'm not aware at the top of my head. I can do some research and get back to you on that.
Sure, thanks.
You're not jotting that one down? Okay. I can only do so many things. So if someone else can jot down these take-homes too, that'd be good. Yeah, Mr. Moldenhauer.
Question. When events take place in a park, there's an insurance premium that's got to be paid or something toward that for insurance for that event. And also, does that go also into security?
I'm going to go to Mr. Cheeseborough on which events require insurance.
So not all special events require that they obtain insurance. There's 3 factors that go into when a special event is required to obtain insurance and provide that to the city. That is when there is alcohol being served at the event, when there's more than 200 people that are anticipated to attend the event, or when the event is requesting to close a public street. Only if one of those 3 factors are occurring during the special event does the city require that they obtain insurance. All special event providers do provide an indemnification agreement to the city, indicating that they will be responsible for any damage caused by their special event.
The second question was, is there any call out for security?
For security, we require that they provide us a letter of insurance showing that they've obtained the insurance
I
required.
think he's
when there's
alluding to, are you alluding to like site security?
Yes.
Yeah.
Not specifically. There's the ordinances that provide that the city can charge expenses that we've incurred to them, and that'll be discussed later on.
Okay. Megan?
So from the first timeline of our process and our steps, we are currently, today we received all of the department charges, and we will be invoicing out that 20% as our next step.
So what we wanted to cover in this section is under what, in that special event review process, what each department looks for. We're not going to read all these to you, but if you guys want to touch on a couple high-level ones.
So in the finance clerk's office, we review the application, make sure it's received timely, that the fees are paid, they've provided everything required on the application. We look into if there's any other events going on that it would interfere with, payments made, and just general compliance with other codes. Health gets notified for awareness if they need to supply any vehicles, temporary structures, and that it meets requirements for health safety requirements. Also, if they're selling food or beverage, they would need to obtain licenses through them. The city attorney is reviewing if their event does need insurance, that insurance requirement is met and has all of the required information. We also review applications for any false or misleading statements, and that they have not previously had an event that violated any ordinances. Streets Department is reviewing, again, for awareness and equipment needed, if there's staff time needed, that there's no conflicting construction projects in the proposed area, and determining if the size or nature of the special event would disrupt the safety or orderly conduct of the streets or public place. Park and Rec is reviewing for that they have obtained park rentals, if they need amplifying sound permits, concession permits, equipment, if they're parking on public property, and if staff time is needed. Fire and EMS is reviewing, again, for awareness. They're checking to see if they are providing their own first aid, or if they are going to be notified of that. If there's extra coverage needed for that event. Making sure that vehicle, temporary structures, sanitary facilities, tents, again, all meet the requirements for fire and safety. Police Department is reviewing for awareness, if they need barricades, fencing, if they need to have auxiliary police there, extra coverage. They're making sure that the conduct of the special event will abide by the law, including noise regulations. And they're also determining if the special event size or nature requires diversion, if so great of number of municipal services, so as to deny reasonable services to the city as a whole.
This last page here is the special event permit application and kind of the supporting sheet that goes along with it. Before I move to parks, I want to check in to see if people have questions for Megan. Ms. Davis.
I don't know if you want to go all the way back to the financial and clerk list, but it kind of goes down, and a lot of these things are detailed in the code as far as requirements for the application. One thing you'll notice that's missing is any kind of security plan, which is interesting because for an outdoor entertainment permit, open container entertainment permit, there is a request for a detailed security plan, but we don't have one for special events. And there's no talk anywhere throughout this as to, like, again, going back to who's responsible. So for instance, for our security plan, who's responsible for that, coming up with that security plan? Do they need to have a security firm do the security plan, or is that something that we take on ourselves here in Watertown? So I just noticed that there's no talk or discussion in our special event process to specifically security.
We have security conversations, but we can. Ms. Davis.
I'm sorry, I have another question. I'm trying to kind of visualize how this all works. Is this exist in some sort of shareable spreadsheet? And is it like columns and the departments go through and check and say, got that, got that, got that? Or is it a packet? I'm just kind of curious, could we request the Pride in the Park packet to see all of these items? How does it exist?
Why don't you speak first to how the special event permit, it comes in and how it gets compiled and routed to all the different departments?
So we did create a spreadsheet, and it does list all of the specific permits needed. And then the department is writing on that spreadsheet if they've approved it or not. So they are, confirming that they've done all of these things. And that's kind of our checks and balances.
And could you have that? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we can provide the Excel spreadsheet, I assume.
So the spreadsheet that I did provide you is just missing kind of
Sure.
some of those other steps.
But all the corresponding documents, that's just exists in the departments. Maybe they put it then on their to-do list. We got to do this, we got to do this, we got to do this for this special event, barricades, park staff, and so on. Is that?
We're going to hear from the two other departments
Okay.
involved, so maybe when you guys speak, you can speak to how that works in each of your departments. Is that okay, Ms. Davis?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Was there another hand? Okay. Any other questions on the special event part? We can obviously go back, but before I invite our next person up. All right, so then I think Christine, I believe you're next. Oh, man. I even turned that one on. I just need the whole room to know. We checked the batteries on all of these microphones before we started. I saw Stephen bent down in the
it's
corner.
on, it's
Oh,
on.
there
We
we
got
go.
it, we got it.
Okay,
We're good.
very good. So Christine, will you just introduce yourself, please?
Yes, I am Christine Buttress. I am the Director of Parks, Recreation, and Forestry with the City of Watertown. So this is just kind of a review of what we do for our reservations. With our reservations, we start all reservations off with a kind of a first come, first served lottery type of system at the beginning of the year that goes through the beginning of February. After that, we do kind of a draw of the hat to see who gets what dates. After they get those dates selected and there's no other conflicts with previous reservations that came in earlier, we then send it on to the person that's making the reservation, telling them, yay, you're approved. And then after that, we go through all of the list of the things that they need. If they need amplified sound, if they do need concessions permits, everything like that to the day of the event. We make sure that they have trash cans, picnic tables, all of those are for rent. That's kind of the long and short of it. I will speak to how we get notified of special events within the park system and how things are kind of on the way to changing. Currently, we receive an Excel sheet. And in that Excel sheet, it has when the event came in, what the event is, and then it has a PDF of the actual event application. So we get to see what the event application is and what it all involves. After that, we check our list to make sure that they have everything that they need. And usually by that point, the event is already reaching out to us, letting us know if they need orange boards, more picnic tables, trash cans, you name it, we get it for them. Benches as well. So that's kind of how it works on the city side of things. And for like the town square, we added another tab to that Excel sheet for all of our special events that happen in the town square so that everyone is also aware of what's happening within the city, within our parks, and then within the town square. So all departments are aware.
And then I think there was a question about, I know I received it anyway, about if we've allowed people to rent all of Riverside Park before.
Yes, we have always allowed it. When I came on last year in August, I was kind of looking at all of the forms and realized there were a lot of things that needed to be buttoned up, and I felt like that was one of them. So on our current reservation form, we do have the option. It was always an option, but now it's actually on paper. So.
I think Riverfest is the best example
Yes.
of that.
I mean, Riverfest is what, they're in their 38th year, I think.
That I don't know, but.
36th year. So yes, so Riverfest would be a prime example of, we've always allowed it, but it's just on paper now.
And then, could you speak maybe to the kind of the dovetailing there? So there's a special event application that gets completed, and then there's a park reservation
Yes.
sheet that gets completed, amplified sound permits that get completed, concession. Those are all separate
Forms.
forms.
Yep,
Okay.
so for us, we have our park reservation form along with the amplified sound that we do, and then if any additional amenities are needed.
Okay.
For anything that would need an alcohol permit or a road closure, it automatically has to be a special event and goes straight to downtown. So,
Very good. Ms. Davis, I see you.
So it's possible for an organization or a company to have a private event and rent the whole Riverside Park, correct?
yes, yep,
But when it's a special event, by code, a special event is for general public. The general public are always invited to special events by code. Is that a correct summary for everyone?
I'm going to let Stephen answer that.
It's number one in the definition of special code for the
That
general
it's
public.
open to the public is part of a definition of the special event.
Right. So if you can rent the park out, but if you're going to make it a public event, you're going to get a special event permit too. But you can rent the park out privately, have like a corporate picnic there, and you don't have to get a special event, correct?
depending if it's over 200 people, they would need a special event, or if there is alcohol served, or if they wanted to close off the roadway. So, given those three circumstances, if none of those are met, then they wouldn't need a special event, but if they do need any of those three things, a special event permit is needed.
That's a little bit different than the code. The code does speak to numbers, but it talks about exceeding the maximum occupancy of the property. So it doesn't really speak to 200, the number 200. And it also doesn't speak to necessarily alcohol,
Special events?
right? So for our parks, couldn't they bring their alcohol in and not sell it?
It's,
Megan, can you use
okay.
the mic? Thank you.
Maybe Stephen wants to take that one.
So the 200 people, 200 people serving of alcohol or the closing of public road is only referenced in our code in regards to the need for insurance. The code as it stands on the website right now, I believe has been updated, and if the event is solely within a public park, does not require a special event application if a reservation of the park is provided.
Thank you.
Mr. Board, did you have your hand up? Or did I imagine that?
I'm curious then, who approves a park reservation versus a special use permit?
The Parks Department approves the park reservation following a similar procedure to the special events applications.
Okay. They are two separate,
There are two separate processes, and there's several departments that could still raise an objection or request a denial for a requested park event or reservation.
so does that assume that the Parks Department is putting together the same spreadsheet of requests that the clerk's office is doing?
They
Is
do
that how
for
the departments know?
They do for the town square. For other park rentals, most of those rentals are substantially smaller, and so it's something that they do notify some of the other departments about, but not to the same extent yet that the special events process does.
I do think this is an important point for us to understand, because potentially it could have led to some confusion at our Pride in the Park Day, so that there's a difference between a private event where invited people only are allowed to come and a public event open to the general public in a public park, as to how people with contrary viewpoints are able to access the park. Correct? So when it's a private event, by invitation only to restricted people, then that would change where someone with a contrary viewpoint would be allowed to go. Would you say? So that someone who, let's say they just really dislike that business and they wanted to picket that business, they would not be allowed to enter that private party without being charged with trespassing. Is that correct?
Here's a good example. I know we have area churches that rent a lot of Riverside Park for their church festivals. Some of them are large enough they get a special event permit. If I am contrary to their church's belief, could I come into their event? Yes. Could I be removed? Yes.
Correct. But that's different than, that private aspect would be different than a special event permit, which is by definition open to the general public.
No,
The general public is invited, and it's at a public
I
park.
think we're saying different things. So we do have, because we have churches that get special event permits, and they
Well-
host them
Well,
at
then
the,
that would be general. It would fall under
Yep.
that aspect. And they could be contrary in the park with the church members present.
they could. And if you run an event like this, let's go with the church example, and someone is, I'm, the lead organizer of my church picnic, and someone comes and is disruptive, I think the question you're trying to get at is that person allowed to be removed from my church picnic? And do either of you have an answer to that?
It's a complicated matter. The answer is yes. Anytime somebody causes a disruption, we can always have them removed from the park.
Do you have the code on that? I'd like to see it. Because the First Amendment, as you all know, and I'm no expert, general public, special event, general public allowed to attend and invited and encouraged to attend in a public forum, a public park, then they are allowed to have a contrary viewpoint, hold signs, talk loudly, as long as they are not physically intimidating or physically interfering or being so loud that the permitted speaker cannot be heard. Those are the things that would allow them to be removed. But just going in and having a contrary viewpoint and saying things and holding a sign is protected speech. Wouldn't you agree?
Ms. Davis, so we're going to have, and you can probably say this better than I can, we have a responsibility to protect the interests of this city. We're going to have a closed session discussion. I think your question may be best answered there. Stephen, do you agree?
Yes.
These are general principles, though.
I'm going to be, so we're not going to have that in here today. I just don't want people, I don't think it's conducive to have people shouting from the audience. We're going to run, I think we're doing, sir, we're running a public meeting. We don't have any comment from the public on the agenda tonight. I think we've been quite understanding of everyone and making sure that everyone can be heard. We listened to many insightful public comments. So I'm not attempting to limit that discussion. Sir, ma'am, I'm happy to answer questions. I did answer her question. I'm not going to conversate back and forth with the audience. I'm just giving everyone, I just want that awareness. We don't have it on the agenda. We aren't allowed to have that. Ms. Davis, if you'd like us to continue down this line of questioning, I will leave it up to the city attorney to answer you so that you can feel as though your questions have been answered. So Stephen, Ms. Davis, why don't you rephrase your question for
Sure.
us?
I'll rephrase my question, but first let me rephrase it to the council, and then you can have a decision whether or not we want to have this answered or not. So I guess my question is, if a special event is in a public park and the general public is invited to attend, can a person go into that park holding a sign that expresses a contrary viewpoint? Oh, let me throw it out to the council. Is that something that you would like to?
I appreciate you asking them, but really it's Stephen's opinion that matters.
Okay.
The matter is, again, very complicated. There are various different things that can affect what the answer to that question is. In general, a event that's held out to the public, the First Amendment rights do apply to it, and the event would continue on, and people that have opposing viewpoints would be allowed to enter the park. Again, in any situation, if somebody causes a disturbance, they can still be removed from the park. And whether or not signs are permitted at some type of event would depend on other ordinances and regulations. And so,
Sir. Sir, please. We have to just make sure that we run an orderly meeting. I've just been in too many of these meetings where it doesn't work well to have people combating back and forth. So as the chair of this meeting, I am asking everyone in this room, to please limit the conversation from, well, do not have conversation from the audience. This is as agenda. This is for this discussion with our alders and our city team that is presenting materials. Ms. Davis, did you think you received an answer to your question? I heard an answer. He can repeat it for you if you'd like.
You provided an answer. I think it would require follow-up discussion.
Mr. Schmidt.
I'd just like an interjection for call to order today, so we stay to the agenda.
We're staying with the
I
agenda.
mean, so it's, because for point A, we're still under presentation from police and park to
Yep.
the overall view, but when we delegate into these important conversations need to be had, it doesn't fall under the presentation aspect of the first agenda point?
Prior to you arriving, we had discussion that the presentation, and we would offer questions as we went along from the alders.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I apologize if I
Nope.
missed that. I just wanted to
No
make sure that
problem.
we stay on the agenda so we don't
Yep.
get in trouble from an audit standpoint,
Yep.
so.
Nope, I appreciate that. Questions for Christine on the park reservation process? Or any other matter for parks? All right. I do not know who's next. Streets. So Stacy, if you just want to introduce yourself.
Hello, I am Stacy Winkleman, Operations Manager for the Street and Solid Waste Division. Did it go off?
Nope, you're good.
To echo Christine's procedure of how we go about on the street special event permits, we get that spreadsheet from city clerk's office. I go in, there's a tab or an attachment of the actual permit that you saw on the screen here earlier. On that permit, the first thing I personally, for my division, look at is there road closures, are barricades needed, are fencing needed? That allows me to schedule. If none of that is needed, there's no charges from my division for that. So that's the way I go about it. For this event, let me back up. So on a street closure event, we take out barricades preferably Friday afternoon. While our staff is working, we put them off to the side, so the event organizers, if the event's on Saturday, they pull them out. It's not costing any overtime. I don't have to schedule people. An event such as this last one, the Pride in the Park, where they need vehicles as roadblocks or getting the panels of fencing. Obviously, for insurance and liability, our employees need to drive our equipment. It needs to be our division's employees because there's special CDLs and licensing requirements to drive certain pieces of equipment. So in that event, I have to schedule them ahead of time. So when I see this permit, I always put a note in our scheduling calendar, get this amount of people who will work that day, schedule it accordingly, and then from that, depending who signs up to work is how I come up with our charges on their hourly rate. We do have a set list of equipment charges. That's from the DOT, so that's how I would charge for that. And that is basically how we charge for our stuff.
Do you want to step through the content of the slide from today?
Oh, what's up there now?
Yeah.
Right, so at the event, and a lot of the times we have to work with our police department because they tell us where they would like our trucks, what we need blocked off, how big is the intersection. That kind of depends on what equipment we schedule to have out there. Obviously, a grader was one of the things we had out this time. It's super big. That takes one person to drive, and it covers about the same as 2 trucks. So we do try to make it as practical as possible on how many people we need to work these events. The barricades, we take out typically on the last day, working day before the event. So those should have all been out there. And then auxiliary police, the police department staff, event people they pull those out for us. The trucks we had to bring in, we had only three people for the 10-hour shift, so they were just moving the vehicles. They had to stay for the full event in case they needed to jump in one of the pieces of equipment and move it. That's not something another city staff person can really do. It has to be our division employees. So they did have to stay for the entire time. And then the one man for 2 hours, he does have a special Class A CDL license to be able to drive the big semi and tractor trailer. So He did that for the pickup of the fencing and tear down of the fencing and driving that piece of equipment.
Any questions for Stacy? Ms. Davis?
So I believe the event was at July 29th. I'm wondering at what point you got notice that you needed all of these trucks and closure barricades ready to go on that date?
Usually the week before, things are fine-tuned with our division and the police department. We do have meetings during the week as to where we need to put things, how many items we need. So we know about the event well before that, but we fine-tune and have meetings with city staff the week of typically.
Other questions for Ms. Winkleman? Ms. Davis?
For this event and other events, then when you calculate total cost, do you then go through and count up the 10 hours for 3 men, the 2 hours, the?
We're going to touch on that one next.
Okay.
Yep.
Yep.
Anybody else for Stacy before we switch to expenses? And I believe Mr. Stevens is going to present on that one. Thank you, Stacy. Mr. Stevens.
Summary of some of the different kinds of expenses. As Megan mentioned earlier, our department sends out a request to all of the departments asking for them to present to us any related expenses to a special event. And so we have to wait for all departments to respond because we don't know if there was something that perhaps came up at the event itself. And so this is always done after each event. Because of tonight's conversation, we implored departments, please get us the numbers. And so some of these are late breaking just today to try to compile and make sure that we've got everything that we could. Included under labor would be 2 departments, police department and streets division. So that you understand, we take the compensation costs of the individuals that are involved with this. And so when I define compensation, I'm not talking about just their hourly rates of pay, but compensation does include the other benefits expenses that are included there. What is included as well, as a government agency, we have what is called comp time available to our employees in lieu of overtime, and those numbers are included in the 2 figures that you see. What is not included is the next bullet of exempt hours. There are managers of departments that are not provided overtime based on Fair Labor Standards Act. And so there are police department and street hours that are listed there. There was nothing paid to those individuals because of their exempt status. And then lastly on the list would be equipment. There was fencing rental, as well as then the items that Stacy was just referring to. What the equipment was, lowboy and trailer, that's for moving up the fencing, dump trucks, a total of 8, and a grader. And then what I've got listed there are a differentiation, if you will, for the number of hours that each of those was used versus there are hours listed that are barricaded use only. Nobody was behind the wheel, if you will, during those hours.
Mr. Moldenhauer.
Just one question on what we're looking here on the screen. There were different departments involved in this, I believe, too. Where's billing for those guys?
These are the bills that we received.
So I mean, the other departments involved would have been parks, but there was, I mean, do you want to speak to that? I mean, that was processing of an application?
Yeah, so we had already processed that application, was paid for. Amplified music permit was paid for, so all of that was paid for prior to, or previously to the event, so that was already paid for, so that's why it's not on this slide. So that's not what
people
has
pay-
to be paid
When
yet.
people pay the park reservation fee and the amplified, like the permit fees, they pay those, and we essentially included that fee, the processing of those applications.
Outside policing would have been paid for ahead of time.
No.
Outside policing, so Chief, do you want to speak to the outside agencies?
So I requested assistance from outside agencies in Jefferson and Dodge counties, police department, sheriff's department, the state patrol, and the Wisconsin DNR. Each entity that provided staffing, whether it was the sheriff's department or a police department, at this point not requested any repayment for their people being at our event. So they were here, I know a lot of them were on overtime, some were on regular shifts, and they came and assisted us, but I have not received any bills for their assistance.
Chief, would you say, is it customary? I mean, we provide assistance to people at times. Is it,
So there's no written, in state law, there's a statute on mutual aid. We have some type of serious incident where I can request mutual aid. And when I request mutual aid from outside agencies, they can send officers within our city, and in mutual aid, they are responsible by law for their own employee pay, workers' comp, all that kind of stuff under the mutual aid request. Outside of that, I guess like with this event, so we've helped some of these other agencies with events in their cities. So, and when we've done that, we've sent an officer or two, whatever it might be, whatever they've asked for, and we've assisted without being repaid for those services.
Mr. Schmidt?
Follow up to that one, Chief, then. So in the event that we do get a bill, would that information then become public as part of this process so that if we're paying for it, then we could make that public as well? In the event that it happens, because it sounds like it's a mutual agreement between departments, so it may or may not happen.
Correct. Sure.
Second question, following a train of logic, I understand the request from Jefferson County and then potentially Dodge County. The one I don't follow and I actually got questions specifically on was the request from the DNR. So what jurisdictional authority do they have as game wardens? I know they're also, some of them are sworn peace officers as well because they're dual status in regards to law enforcement. But what jurisdiction did they have here and what role did they actually play?
They had full police powers. So he was a police officer while he was working here, just wearing his DNR uniform. But he has full police powers. If you request a backup mutual aid from the DNR, they, at that point, have full police powers. They're authorized to have full police powers. Generally, they operate as a game warden, correct, and that's how they operate. But when you request help from them to come into your city, whether it's for an event or whether it would be a traffic stop and an officer needs help and the game warden's the nearest officer to come by, he has full police powers.
Okay. That was one I didn't have an answer to, so I wanted to get it from you directly.
And the DNR, so in Jefferson and Dodge County, the DNR and the State Patrol and the sheriff's departments and the police departments, they're all in the same. Like when we have meetings or any of those things, they're all included in that as law enforcement partners in the county.
Okay.
Mr.
Thank
Blanky?
So this is probably going to be for Stacy. There is a breakdown of the number of hours and the equipment that was used at the park. Is there a cost breakdown that goes along with that? I mean, obviously, if we're parking a,
Stacy, I'll mark. Sorry to interrupt. Keep going.
okay, obviously, we're parking a dump truck somewhere for 9 hours for use as a barricade, it effectively becomes fencing. We charge a rental for fencing, so is there a cost associated with using a dump truck as a fence?
Mr. Stevens?
There is a state assignment of each vehicle and what the allowable cost is. And those there's a rate table, if you will. And so the city of Watertown has utilized the state rates, and it's something that is approved on an annual basis here within the state. So utilizing those state rates, if you were to total the fencing rental and the 3 operational uses that are shown on the slide, my total for that is $3,769.
You read my mind what my next question was. Thank you.
Other questions?
I do have a question.
Ms. Davis?
So as far as the city's percentage of this, it comes out of a line item somewhere, and I meant to pull up the budget, but I didn't get to it. Do you know, is there an emergency line item or where the funding for this comes specifically in the budget? I know that's a pretty specific question.
Each of the kinds of expense go where they belong. So as a rule of thumb, as an accountant, I have had a longstanding rule that expenses go where expenses belong. And that's what we do here at the city as well. So each of these departments has an associated line item, and that's where the various expenses would go for those sorts of things. If and when reimbursement comes, then it offsets those various line items.
Yes.
And then potentially, if it causes that line item to go over budget, then it would go into just funds that are available and not being used. So, correct? We would cut
Yes.
into our available funds to pay for it.
Any other process questions? We can always obviously come back to them too. All right. Chief, you ready?
Okay. So I'll kind of just give you a rundown of how things went for the police department in planning for the Pride in the Park event. Attached, you'll see a timeline, and I do have that broken down further as we go along, so I don't know that we necessarily need to go point by point across the timeline. For us, though, the event was filed with the city. We had our first discussion in March about staffing, road closures, fencing. Another in June about staffing with Watertown officers and the Jefferson County Mobile Field Force, and I can go into more detail as I get to each slide. In July, I reached out to our state and local law enforcement partners for further assistance as we started to receive some information about protests. In July, we received a specific threat that was relayed to the police department about the possibility of what's called the Blood Tribe, a neo-Nazi group coming to Watertown to protest the event. After that, I scheduled a meeting with the city attorney and the mayor and my assistant chief, Ben Olson, to meet with them to talk about this event coming up. On the 25th of July, we went into further detail about developing an operations plan, contacting additional agencies, letting the street department know about the need for fencing and trucks. And then on the 28th, we started to prep for the event, to set up fencing, close down roadways, meet with some of the planned protest groups, and then the 29th was the event. If you want to go to the next slide. So in February of 2023, a permit for Pride in the Park was submitted to the city. At this point, we had just really no discussion about a security plan. At this point, we didn't have any information about the event, that there was anything going to be going on about the event, and we had no threats of any protests or anything like that at that point. Next slide, please. In March, so just to give you a little bit of an idea, these aren't discussions that happen in a vacuum. I have Assistant Chief Olson, I have Captain Brower behind me, and I have Captain Malloy behind me. And just to give you a little bit of an idea of some of the experience, I mean, we're not just talking the training or years of experience, but Captain Malloy and Sergeant Laura Bowman have been to event security planning for public safety professionals. It's a course put on by FEMA that discusses large events and how to secure those events. Myself, Captain Brower, and Sergeant John Cockett have all been through mobile field force training. Mobile field force training is the type of training that you would go through for dealing with crowds, protests, and things like that. Also, riot training is involved in that as well. And then myself, Sergeant Gallegos, and Sergeant Bowman have all been through active shooter incident management, which is a management class on active shooter incidents. So we have some knowledge, some experience, and we've planned for some events here in Watertown, or have planned for plenty of events in Watertown. So just to give you kind of an idea of what has gone into the background anyways for this, and all events that we plan for. So in March, we again had another discussion on the event. At that time, we really didn't discuss staffing. We still had no planned protests that we were aware of or that were relayed to us. There were no road closures planned for the event, and at that time, we had no fencing that was going to be planned for the event. In June, I had a discussion with Assistant Chief Olson and the two captains about staffing for this event. We had talked about having Watertown officers and the Jefferson County Mobile Field Force. So law enforcement agencies in Jefferson County, Watertown included, we have officers that are all participate and train together as what is called the Jefferson County Mobile Field Force. Mobile field forces have been used in riot situations and in crowd control situations and in protest situations all across our state. The Jefferson County Mobile Field Force has been used in the recent past couple of years. Our officers and officers throughout the county are trained and equipped to work special events, work protest events, things of that nature. Our initial plan was to just staff it with our officers and our partners with the Jefferson County Mobile Field Force. And to give you a number to that, it's summer. Some are on vacation, some would be off, things like that. So we didn't have an exact number at that point, but we were thinking that we'd probably have somewhere in the area of 12 to 15 people for that event. But again, no solid numbers were put down on any plan at that point. Through July 12th to the 18th, we started to receive information of some planned protests being at the event. The initial contacts that we had were with Gays Against Groomers, No Left Turn, and then Parents on Patrol. Assistant Chief Olson initially had contact by phone, I believe, with somebody from Gays Against Groomers who was planning to protest the event. When they initially reached out to us to say that they would be at the event to protest, they were talking numbers of anywhere between, I believe initially 30 to 50 people being on site to protest that event, and they did not have numbers from any of the other groups that were planning to be there, such as No Left Turn and Parents on Patrol. And it was at that point when we started receiving the information about planned protests or protest groups coming to the event is when I started to make my initial contacts with our outside law enforcement agencies in Jefferson and Dodge County about having outside assistance for the event. July 21st of 2023, we received a specific reported threat from the FBI, and that report indicated that a neo-Nazi group by the name of Blood Tribe was planning to come to Watertown to protest that event, and gave us some information on that. And they also provided information that they were hearing the same thing through their channels, that Gays Against Groomers, No Left Turn, and Parents on Patrol would be coming to protest the event as well. It was at that point, after that, they, from the FBI, that we also reached out to state partners from DOJ and DCI, both Department of Justice and Department of Criminal Investigations, that we asked them to start monitoring for any specific threats that would be happening in Watertown. On the 24th, actually probably on the 21st, I believe I requested a meeting with the mayor and the city attorney, and I had Assistant Chief Olson present. At that meeting, we discussed everything from road closures to fencing to staffing, and that is when I made my first ask for the event to be canceled due to my safety concerns for this event happening. On the 25th, we continued to develop an operational plan, and I proceeded to contact more outside agencies to assist, to start getting confirmation from outside agencies as to who could assist us at this event. I placed an order for fencing and then worked with the street department to coordinate the pickup of that fencing. On July 28th, we were in full-blown preparation for Pride in the Park. That was the Friday before. Street Department had picked up the fencing that morning. Myself and some other staff from the Police Department and Street Department began to set up the fencing. Street Department throughout the day worked to start getting trucks and other things, heavy equipment out there to start closing roadways and blocking roadways and putting up signs. It was on that day as well that we ended up meeting in person with the one protest group, Gays Against Groomers. They came to the park. They met specifically with Assistant Chief Olson. He went over everything with them for park rules, protest rules. Everything was explained. And at that time, they had explained that they probably would only have somewhere in the area of 10 to 15 protesters from their group at the event, and that they did not think that anybody from the other groups like No Left Turn or Parents on Patrol would be at the event specifically to protest, since they had been in contact with them. It was at that point that we continued, or we had developed our operational plan, and I sent that out to all of the agencies beforehand so they could look at the operational plan and have it ahead of time. Some of the details that are in our operational plan, and that is what went out in the email, and that is what was went over with all of the agencies at our morning briefing before the event. Visible law enforcement presence will be used to encourage a safe environment for all in attendance. The goal is to avoid making arrests. Arrests have the potential to cause tension and create an unfavorable crowd reaction. All should be alert to changing conditions, which may require more assertive actions and report conditions through the chain of command. So that is in our operational plan, and those are normal operational plan tactics when you're dealing with crowds. We continue in our operational plans that all employees shall remain neutral and impartial with those engaged in civil disturbance. Officers should carefully balance the speech and association rights of those present with applicable public safety concerns before taking enforcement action. Officers should contact organizers or responsible persons to seek voluntary compliance that may address relevant public safety concerns. And then finally, crowd control and other officers will be given assignments during briefing. The main idea is to show presence in routine patrol uniform. Officers will be on foot in patrol teams consisting of 1 Watertown PD officer and 2 to 3 from outside agencies. And that was all gone over with all of the officers that were assigned to the event for that day. Just some of the operational plan details. We divided the park into 7 operational areas, and we had teams assigned to each of those operational areas. It might be a little hard to see, but there are 7 of them on that map. On the day of the event, on July 29th, besides our briefing with all of the officers, we started to get flooded with phone calls at the police department that there was a possible neo-Nazi group over at Brandenstein Park, and that they looked like they were carrying swastika-type flags, and that they looked like they were doing some assembly and practice or something like that at that point. Throughout the entire event on July 23rd, only 3 municipal citations were issued in the park, and then also some conversations with people about staying out of the park as well.
Did you intend to share more about the meet with the Blood Tribe
Um,
from Sergeant Cockett? No, I can't recall.
So we met with the Blood Tribe. We did go to Brandenstein Park. There were several officers that went over to Brandenstein Park and met with the Blood Tribe and had a conversation with them about, and let me just say this. I guess we don't know that it was the Blood Tribe. That was never said to us. I mean, it was a neo-Nazi group, but it was never identified what that group or who that group was. So I don't want to speak inappropriately on that, but we did meet with the group, and Sergeant Cockett, Sergeant Bowman, and some other officers were at the park and went over, again, explained park rules, park regulations, open carry laws, all sorts of things like that. So, and that conversation, to my knowledge, was accepted by everybody there, and there were no issues during that conversation.
Questions for the chief? Mr. Schmidt?
I have one, and then, Chief, answer it if you can. If not, I'll relay to the attorney if it's relevant to the next session. It's a concern that was brought to my attention through emails and phone calls on allegations, and I don't know because it didn't give me an officer's name, allegations of impropriety or favoritism towards one group, the other, because of familiar ties to the group that had the park. Again, this is what was brought to my attention. I don't know. I'm just getting clarification based on the follow-up that I've received from this incident.
There was no, no favoritism by any group. We met with all of the groups, whoever would meet with us, so that we could explain all rules, all regulations, all park rules, and there was no special meetings or any favoritism in that regard.
It was relating to the action specifically of the officer in question, but because they didn't give me an officer's name, I don't know. So I'm just relaying what was conveyed to me as they perceived this individual showing a distinct difference in behavior towards the one group versus the other in regards to questions or concerns that were brought to their attention. So without a name, obviously I can't do more, but I want to make sure that the people who contacted me, let them know that I, asked the question, so.
Yeah, we treated everybody fairly and equally and warned everybody fairly and equally.
Mr. Moldenhauer?
One question I have, the chief was talking about canceling the event altogether. If this is a highly dangerous and not good for Watertown, why did we go forward with it?
Stephen?
We'll discuss that answer in the next portion of the meeting.
Mr. Schmidt?
So relating to one of the slides indicated that you'd received a contact from an outside agency. I believe it was listed as the FBI. When they contacted you specifically relating to what they're calling the blood tribe, did they give you any more information to relate than that? Because that's a relatively new group that's only been around for just barely 24 months. And so I have never, in all of my experience, seen a Nazi group that covered their faces. So my concern is this smells sus all day long. So when they contacted you, did they give you any hard evidence in regards to the actual viability of the threat?
I have an actual report from them that I would not be willing to share without their permission, but I do have a report from them on what was given to me about the threat.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Other questions? Mr. Lampy?
I know the meeting format's a little.
Is your microphone on?
It is not. It is on?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is backtracking a little bit. I just wanted to say thank you for the expediency for the clerk's office on generating the reports on special events going back 2 years with costs and everything. That was super helpful and really happy that that came back in a short amount of time. In terms of the police part, I mean, I think I speak for a lot of citizens when I say, I mean, we're just thankful to the city leadership and Watertown Police Department, the workers and everyone else, who ensured there was no violence at the event. I mean, it was admirable performance in very difficult conditions. Calm, professional, everything you'd expect out of a really highly accredited force. But I do see the need for some special event changes in the future. I went back and I looked through 2023. I think there were 32 events listed here. Myself or my family's involved in 14 of them. So 44% of these are probably going to directly affect it, but I still very much look forward to some changes to making sure that we don't put our police resources or any other resources at risk in the future.
Ms. Davis?
You mentioned that you communicated the park rules and regulations. Are those just general park rules, or are you referencing specific rules for order at the event?
Chapter 398 of park regulation specifies park rules for like signage,
Right.
for amplified music, all of those things. So that was explained to all of the groups prior, such as signs and such as like the use of amplified devices and bullhorns and all of that. That was all explained.
Mr. Blanky?
With the exception of Riverfest, how many of these other events have required police presence?
I'd have to go through the
We looked
list,
at the
Brad, but
special
I
event
can just,
report.
I can say that we're at a lot of events, whether it's police or whether it's auxiliary police, but we participate in a lot of them, but not to this extent. We might have an officer or two or three. I would say probably one of the runs, we have quite a few.
Thank you. Chief, do you want to see this? Is that helpful?
I can take a look at it, but there's... The jig jog, that's the one I was thinking of, that we have quite a few officers and auxiliary officers who assist with that event for traffic control. And then the turkey trot, and I'm not sure if that, or the run turkey run, that one as well. Two pretty big runs that run through some bigger areas where we do a lot more like traffic control type stuff. So other than Riverfest actually gets probably the next most of our resources.
And parades?
And parades, yeah, I shouldn't say that. I guess I didn't look through the parade list, but as well for Christmas and 4th of July, we utilize a lot of our officers, and at that one, we utilize a lot of trucks as well. We're all familiar with Waukesha and the parade tragedy there, and I've been through the debrief. I think probably most of my staff has been through a debrief with Waukesha Police Department on how they handled that event and what they've done for planning purposes from here on out. So our parades, we have now, if you've noticed, we've increased our presence. We've increased the use of trucks and other types of barricades at those.
And the homecoming parade.
Homecoming as well. And
it's the
homecoming is a
largest.
different animal just because it has so many kids. And with all the kids, it's just, we're trying to control. We probably all have met with the homecoming staff just because, those kids run out in the road. They're after candy. There's so many things that happen with that one that we have a big staff, a huge staff at homecoming. Just to keep the kids safe who are running out in the roadway.
Can I answer your question? Other questions for the chief? Any other questions for anyone on our city team from the presentations? Okay. All right, the next item on our agenda is the closed session. So before I seek that motion to go to closed session, I will just remind everyone, we're going to go to closed session, so we're going to ask you to step out. We will not have any action when we return, so we're just reconvening to open session and adjourning. So with that, I'd ask for a motion to go to closed session. I need the full citation. My agenda doesn't have it. Can I have it?
Do you want one of us to just read it?
I can take it.
Okay.
I have to read the whole thing. I would look for a motion to close session to confer with legal counsel who either orally or in writing will advise the governmental body on strategy to be adopted with respect to current or likely litigation. This is under Wisconsin statute, section 19.85, paren 1, paren G. This pertains to Pride in the Park from July of 2023. Is there such a motion to go to closed? Motion by Mr. Lampy, second by Mr. Board. Megan, will you please take the roll?
Lampy.
Aye.
Board. Bartz. Blanky.
Aye.
Smith. Schmid.
Aye.
Wetzel. Moldenhauer. Davis. Motion passed 9-0.
All right, we're in closed session. I'm going to stop the recording.
This conference is no longer being recorded.